When Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie first looked like the closest thing Hollywood had to a royal family, they had the beauty, the fame, the money, the influence, and 6 children who seemed to complete a picture the world could not stop admiring. For years, they were treated like something bigger than just 2 movie stars in love. They were a global obsession, a modern legend, a family that seemed to have everything. But behind the perfect image, something was quietly falling apart. And now, years after their shocking split, the story has become much more painful than anyone first imagined. Because this is no longer just about a failed marriage. It is about what happens when one of the most famous fathers in the world appears to be losing the people who should have mattered most to him. One by one, the signs have become harder to ignore. The distance, the silence, the public decisions that seem to say more than words ever could. And when the children at the center of that once iconic family begin stepping away from the Pitt name itself, the question becomes impossible to avoid. How did Brad Pitt go from being the face of Hollywood's most admired family to the man who may be watching that family slip further and further out of reach? When Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie first built their life together, the world did not just see romance, it saw a fantasy. 2 of the most famous people on Earth creating a family that felt larger than Hollywood itself. They adopted children from different parts of the world, raised biological children of their own, traveled constantly, and projected an image that felt powerful, compassionate, and almost untouchable. To millions of people, they were not just Brad and Angelina, they were Brangelina, a name that became its own celebrity empire. And at the center of that empire were the children, presented to the world as the heart of this extraordinary family story. That is what makes everything that happened later feel so devastating. Because when Angelina Jolie filed for divorce in 2016, the fairy tale did not just crack, it shattered. What stunned people even more was the reason given at the time. Her attorney said the decision was made for the health of the family. That single line changed the way the world saw the breakup. Suddenly, this was not just another celebrity split, driven by ego, distance, or fading love. It sounded deeper, more serious, more painful. And from that moment on, the public stopped looking at Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie as a glamorous couple going their separate ways. Instead, people began looking at them as the center of a family crisis that might leave scars for years. What followed was not a clean Hollywood breakup. It became one of the longest and most emotionally exhausting celebrity family battles in recent memory. The divorce dragged on for years, and what made it so gripping was that the conflict never seemed limited to paperwork or money. The children were always at the center of the story. Custody disputes, legal tension, and years of bitterness turned what should have been a private family collapse into a public saga the world kept watching in slow motion. And that is where Brad Pitt's image began to change in a way no movie role could fix. He was no longer just a handsome, untouchable leading man. He became a father whose relationship with his children was increasingly surrounded by doubt, distance, and painful speculation. The longer the legal war continued, the more people began to feel that something inside this family had broken far more deeply than anyone first realized. Then came the years of subtle but powerful public signals, and those signals started telling a story that no official statement could hide. Because when children grow older, they stop being passive figures in their parents' drama. They begin making choices of their own. And in this family, those choices would soon become impossible to ignore.
The clearest signs did not come from the courtroom. They came from the children themselves. Over time, the public began noticing something that felt small at first, but soon became impossible to dismiss. Several of the Jolie Pitt children appeared to be publicly stepping away from the Pitt name. Zahara introduced herself as Zahara Marley Jolie. Vivian was listed publicly as Vivian Jolie. And then came the moment that truly shook people. Shiloh, once seen by many as one of the most recognizable children in Hollywood, moved to legally drop Pitt from her surname when she turned 18. That was not just celebrity gossip anymore. That felt symbolic. In families, names carry weight. They are not just labels. They represent identity, closeness, history, and emotional loyalty. So when more than one child appears to step away from a father's name, the world does not see it as random. It sees a message, even if no one says the message out loud. And that is what makes this story so heartbreaking. The silence almost says more than any interview ever could. No dramatic family tell-all, no explosive press conference, just one public sign after another, each one making the same painful possibility feel more real. That Brad Pitt may not just have lost his marriage, but something even harder to recover, his place at the center of his children's lives. That is the part people find hardest to look away from. Careers can survive scandal, reputations can be rebuilt, even the ugliest celebrity divorces eventually fade into the background. But when a father appears to be losing emotional ground with his own children, that lands differently. It feels less like Hollywood drama and more like something painfully human. Because beneath the fame, the mansions, and the headlines, this becomes a story about rejection, regret, and the kind of distance that money cannot repair. For Brad Pitt, that may be the cruelest twist of all. He was once seen as the man who had everything: beauty, talent, status, and the kind of family image most celebrities would do anything to protect. But now, the image that follows him is very different. Not just a movie star, not just a former half of a legendary couple, but a father standing on the outside of a family he once seemed to define. And what makes it even sadder is that family distance rarely happens all at once. It happens slowly, through missed moments, strained trust, unspoken anger, years passing without healing, until one day the silence itself becomes the story. What makes Brad Pitt's situation even more tragic is that this does not feel like a scandal with a clear ending. It feels like the aftermath of something that kept spreading long after the first break. Over the years, Brad has given glimpses of regret and personal reflection, speaking about mistakes, pain, and the need to confront parts of himself he could no longer ignore. But in broken families, self-awareness does not automatically bring people back. Real damage has a different timeline. Trust, once shattered, does not return because someone finally understands what they did wrong. And children, especially as they grow older, begin to decide for themselves who feels safe, who feels close, and who feels like a painful part of the past. That is why this story has become so emotionally gripping. It's not just about what happened between Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. It's about what happens after the headlines fade, when the real consequences settle into everyday life. The birthdays you don't get back, the milestones you're no longer part of, the growing realization that the people you love may be building their future without you. For a man who once seemed to have the world in his hands, that kind of loss may be the one thing fame cannot soften. Angelina Jolie, meanwhile, has come to represent the other side of this family story in the public imagination. Fairly or unfairly, she is often seen as the parent the children stayed closest to, the one who remained at the center of their daily world as the years passed and the family divide deepened. That perception has only grown stronger with time, especially as more public moments seem to show the children standing beside her, not him. And that is what makes Brad Pitt's position feel even more painful. Because in family breakdowns, public perception can become its own kind of reality. You may know your own side of the story. You may carry your own wounds, regrets, and explanations. But if the world keeps seeing your children move closer to one parent and farther from the other, that image starts to define everything. In the Jolie Pitt saga, there was never one single moment that explained it all.
There was no final speech, no dramatic confession, no neat conclusion. Instead, the collapse unfolded in fragments: a legal fight, a changed surname, a public appearance, a quiet absence. And somehow that makes it even more haunting, because the audience is left staring at the pieces, trying to imagine what the full picture must look like behind closed doors.
There is also something deeply symbolic about watching this happen to Brad Pitt, of all people. For decades, he seemed almost untouchable. He was the man who could survive scandals, reinventions, changing eras in Hollywood, and still remain one of the biggest stars in the world. He always looked like someone who would land on his feet no matter what happened. But family estrangement is different. It strips away the illusion of control. It exposes a kind of pain no red carpet can hide and no blockbuster can erase. That is why this story feels so much bigger than celebrity gossip. Because underneath all the fame, it reveals a truth people immediately understand. Losing the emotional connection of your children may be the most devastating loss of all. It does not matter how admired you are in public if the people who once gave your life its deepest meaning seem to be slipping further away in private. And that is the brutal irony at the center of Brad Pitt's story. He may still be one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, but the role that now seems hardest for him to hold on to is not movie star. It is father. Maybe that is why people cannot stop watching this story, not because it is glamorous, but because it feels painfully real. There is no perfect villain here, no perfect victim, and no simple ending that neatly explains everything. Families rarely fall apart in a way that outsiders can fully understand, and yet the public pieces of this story are powerful enough to leave a lasting impression. A once iconic marriage collapsed into years of conflict. The children, who were once seen as the beautiful symbol of a blended family that inspired the world, now seem to reflect division, distance, and emotional fallout. And Brad Pitt, a man who once appeared to have everything, now seems tied to a far sadder image. Not triumph, not romance, not even reinvention, but separation. The collapse of this family matters to people because it shatters more than a relationship. It shatters a fantasy. It reminds the world that even the most admired families can carry invisible fractures for years, until one day those fractures become impossible to hide. In the end, the fall of Hollywood's most famous family was not one explosive moment. It was a slow unraveling, a quiet collapse stretched across years where the most painful details were often the ones no one had to say out loud. The marriage ended, the image broke, and the children, once seen as the living proof of a perfect modern family, gradually became the clearest sign that something deep had been lost. Whether Brad Pitt can ever rebuild those bonds is something the public cannot know. Some wounds heal in private. Some relationships return only after years of silence, and some losses leave a mark that never fully disappears. But what makes this story so haunting is not just that a famous couple fell apart. It is that one of the most powerful men in Hollywood now seems connected to a far more heartbreaking question. What happens when fame, success, and global admiration are still not enough to keep your own family close? And maybe that is why this story continues to linger, because beneath the celebrity headlines and the public fascination, it feels like a tragedy about something universal: love breaking down, trust disappearing, and the unbearable pain of watching the people who once defined your world slowly become strangers.